Okay, so last night I finished the Wuthering Waves 2.4 story so far, and I am dying to talk about it because holy smokes, there's a lot to unpack here. So let's get this out of the way right up front. If you haven't finished the 2.4 story yet, which are chapters 5 and 6, Shadows of Glory and Flames of Heart, then for crying out loud, man, hit pause and go play that shit because it is golden. And if you have, well, then hang with me and let's break it all down because by the time you get to the end of this story, trust me, you are going to have a healthy helping of what the fuck did I just see. Before we get started, though, I want to start off by talking a little bit about story in games, because quite often storytelling in games is much maligned. If there's any story at all, right, it's usually a very straightforward, linear narrative. Something or someone is in peril. The player character is the only one that can save said something or someone. A villain, or two, stands in the way, and the player must defeat the villain or villains and save the something. Oh, and then there's also the one where you have to go to the 5 tribes to gather the 5 pieces of the foozle to defeat the ultimate evil. I swear, I think that one's in like every single game. And you know what? That's actually fine because typically in games, the story takes backseat to the gameplay itself. In fact, often the story is only the thinnest of excuses provided to the player for them to progress through the game to get to the better gameplay. But you know, occasionally a game will tinker with a complex story, something with multiple narratives, threads that are seemingly separate and disjointed, only to weave around each other and come together in unexpected ways at the very end of the tale. It's risky for a game to do this, right? Knowing a huge percentage of their players may well just decide to skip through the narrative and ignore the story bits altogether to get to the gameplay. I mean, seriously, is it wise to invest time, money, and resources into parts of your game that you know a significant percentage of your players may just straight up ignore? It's a risk, right? But some games, perhaps because they have the resources to burn, or maybe just because they want to deliver something more to the players that do care, they do take the risk. And while it doesn't always pan out, sometimes it pans out in spades. And I think that that's the case with Kiro Games and this story segment. It's been some time since I've seen any game take as big of a swing at the fences as they have done with their story, let alone a gacha game, right? A genre known more for big boobs than big stories. But here we are, and the result, I find, is something truly special. Okay, so let's recap the story and bring together all the parts that you may not have picked up on, and make sure that we cover all of the delicious foreshadowing that occurs throughout, all of which, at least to my observation, I'm happy to say was accounted for by the end. So our story starts off right after the Righteous One has defeated Fleur-de-Lis, breaking the Threnodian's hold over her, even though she was literally created to be a resonator for the Threnodian, and with Rover and Cardathia and her Fleur-de-Lis counterpart now having become fast friends. We learn that there's been an unexpected burst of energy from Cardathia's Sonoro, and upon arriving to check it out, we find Cardathia missing. The only clue we have is that Cardathia's residual frequencies lead across the water towards Septimont. After a brief history lesson from Cantarella, we're on our way. And already, Abby is giving us hints that the frequencies are all messed up. And upon arriving, Abby completely checks out and doesn't reply to our summons at all. Some brief exploration takes us to a cave where we send some residual energy from Cardathia, and we get this vision of her squaring off against an enormous tacit discord, this half-human, half-lion thing. And this is really important, because what we don't know yet is that this is where Cardathia slipped into a separate Sonoro, and this Sonoro is made up of stories, and each story is its own reality. And what we don't know yet as well is that we have also slipped into this Sonoro, and that we also are already in another story, another reality, and all of this has been crafted by Cristoforo. So we make our way into the city, and we soon come across Lupa, gladiator extraordinaire. And upon meeting her, we get a brief hint of Cardathia's residual frequency off of her. And at the time, of course, we have no idea why. But again, what we don't know is that Cardathia gave the Nameless One, the version of Lupa wandering around the story with Cardathia, a bit of her energy just before her role was completely erased from that story. And she did this to serve as sort of a beacon, a signpost, because she knew that Rover would pick up on this in whatever story that she was in with Lupa and stay with her. And that's exactly what Rover does. So Lupa has abandoned her former team because they're a bunch of no good, dirty, scoundrel cheaters, and she'll have none of that. Her and Rover team up to fight in the Great Aegon, the city's gladiatorial festival. But the night before the final match, Rover has a dream, a sonorosphere, if you will, and is greeted by Frolova. And this is one of the most delicious parts of this story, because Frolova is practically telling Rover what is happening. But we, the player, don't yet have enough information to actually make sense of it. But in retrospect, once it's all laid out, it makes perfect sense. And that is the best kind of foreshadowing.
As a creator, he always hopes his characters will craft twists and turns that he himself cannot foresee. He believes that the closer one stands to the protagonist, the greater their influence over the tale. But the true lead of the story has yet to emerge.
Belova is straight up telling us here that Cristoforo is trying to control who the protagonist is in the story that he's written, because he wants to replace the Lupa protagonist with Maya Threnodian protagonist to further feed the fledgling Threnodian that he's cultivating down in the bowels of the city. But Belova herself is not entirely pleased with this turn of events and is nudging the story in her own direction. We don't exactly know what Belova's motivations are here. It may just be that she's simply bored. She even hints that if every encounter with Rover is antagonistic, it would be droll. She tells Rover that she needs to become the protagonist and that she needs to destroy Lupa because Lupa will bring about the dark tide. And Rover, and right now we as well, the player, we really don't know what to make of all this. We just know that we're suspicious of anything from Belova, including this script that she gives us. Also, several times by now, Rover has started to catch glimpses of corrupted Mia when looking at Lupa. And again, we don't really know what's going on at this point in the story. But we learn this is because of two reasons. First, the walls between Cardathia's story and Rover's story are very thin, and they're beginning to overlap and commingle a little bit. And second, as we mentioned, Cristoforo wants the protagonist of the story that Lupa is in to be 100% replaced with Threnodian Mia. And this actually is possible because he's crafted this story on the backs of what actually happened over a decade ago, when Maya was fighting in the Aegon, but was already being tormented by the voices from the Threnodian. And in fact, this Lupa in this story is already tainted by the Threnodian's corruption, as we saw in a previous battle when she lost control and very nearly killed Rover. So the next day the big fight comes, and at first the fight goes as expected, but then Rover finds herself slipped somewhat into the alternate story where Cardathia is, and she hears Cardathia and she knows that she is near. And then we, the player, we end up fighting the corrupted Arsinosa in Cardathia's story as Cardathia. And we are treated to this glorious, amazing side-by-side fighting cinematic with Rover fighting Tacit Discords in the Dark story and Cardathia fighting and ultimately destroying the corrupted Arsinosa in that story. And the incredibly cool thing about this fight is this has already happened. We know it's already in the past because Rover saw the vision of this from the moment she arrived in Septima. So not only are the realities merging here, but time itself is being distorted as present Rover fights with past Cardathia. It's mind-boggling and confusing, and only at the end of it can we make sense of it all. Oh, and at the end of this fight, we see this awesome moment where Cardathia is recognizing that Cristoforo is the one crafting this story, this scenario, and she vows that she, alongside with Rover, will bring an end to all of this. And then we get this fantastic shot of Rover just going, what the fuck did I just see? Which, by the way, exactly mirrored my own expression at that time. This is the end of part one of the story. Okay, so part two of the story picks up with us having an encounter with good Arsinosa in our story, and upon touching the Guardian of Septimont, we realize that the source of the discordant frequencies is coming from the Veil of Glory. Now, yeah, it's a tenuous connection to be sure, but it does provide us with a reason to travel to the Veil of Glory. We also see that all is not right with Lupa, and this is because the Maya Threnodian influencer is growing, and her role in the story is actively trying to be supplanted by Cristoforo. Now, we should actually back up here and talk a bit about the parallel story going on with Cardathia, because even though we don't spend as much time in it, it's equally important. Cardathia arrived in Septimont because she sensed the disruption in reality Cristoforo was wrecking here, and she immediately fell into one of the alternate stories, one in which Septimont had been destroyed by the Dark Tide. And there she finds a version of Lupa wandering about that has already had her role in the story almost completely erased. She's corrupted, and she can't remember what her name is or who she is. But our first glimpse of Cardathia's story is actually past this point, where she's been searching for a sea creature abomination she thinks is causing the destruction in the sphere, and she's caught glimpses of it. This search leads her to the experimental unit that Cristoforo has been incubating the Threnodian in, and in an attempt to destroy it, she actually sets the Maya Threnodian free. And we see here in this cinematic that the protagonist is already being overlaid with our protagonist, Lupa. Cardathia pursues the Threnodian and comes across the corrupted Arsinosa standing before her, blocking her way, and she knows that she must defeat it, which in turn brings us to where we are with the other story. Catches them both up. Makes perfect sense, right? Right. So as Lupa and Rover explore the Veil of Glory, it becomes clear that this is the epicenter of what's going on. And as a corrupted Maya vision overlays Rover's view of Lupa once again, Rover starts putting the pieces together. Or at least she's asking the right questions, although she doesn't yet have all of the answers. So we spend some time touching swords, and it's clear that these two realities are blending into each other as we fight Tacit Discords that suddenly appear out of nowhere. Along with the help of the Guardian Arsinosa, we enter the central hub, which is where the Sentinel Imperator's power is held, and it's now that the Threnodian reveals its control over Lupa, forcing her to attack the hub. But in a brief moment, Rover is able to separate Lupa from the Threnodian, and in that instance, before the Threnodian can recover, Rova thrusts the script into Lupa's hands and forces her out of this reality and into yet a third story. Now, don't ask how she can do this. We just have to trust that she can. This leaves Rover and the Threnodian trapped here in this story, and now Lupa must go it on her own. And this is so awesome, right? Because it fits perfectly with the theme of the entire larger story, which is, what does it take to be a hero? For Maya, it was sacrificing herself because she knew that she was being consumed by the Threnodian's corruption. And for Rover, instead of killing Lupa, she decides to trust the warrior to set things right, sacrificing her own role in this story. Lupa wakes up in yet another story, and at first suspects it is all just a dream, right? But as she sees the medal that she and Rover won together, her memories come back. And now it's her memories from all of the stories in this row. She remembers dying over and over again as the dark tide rolled over Septimont time after time before Cardathia arrived. She remembers traveling with Cardathia, and she remembers the story that she's just left from Rover. And so she vows to set this right, realizing now that she is the only one that can erase the Threnodian from this story. At this point, as Lupa drains the aqueducts, the story begins to reveal itself. Finally, we catch a glimpse of the moment when Cardathia gave Lupa a bit of her essence, in short, sending her with a message to find the righteous one, just before she was erased from her story. As Lupa ventures deeper into the aqueducts, we catch further glimpses of the past. We see Cristoforo orchestrating his plans to use the dead body of Mia as a vessel to cultivate the sliver of the Threnodian that remained within her, and Frolova's disapproval of Cristoforo's methods of crafting this neurosphere. Finally, with all of the pieces revealed, we reach the climactic conclusion. Lupa thinks back over all of the people that have influenced her, Rover, Cardathia, even Mia, and she comes to understand herself what is necessary to be a hero. All of this builds up to this final battle between Mia Threnodian and Lupa, and holy smokes, what an amazing and satisfying cinematic conclusion. And as Lupa destroys the Threnodian and frees the lingering bit of Mia trapped within, the various stories unravel. The Sonoro collapses, and all three of them are finally reunited. And let me tell you, by the time that you reach this screen with the music full on playing, if you're not shedding at least a little bit of a tear, I'm sorry, you clearly have no soul. And so that's it. That's this complex, multi-layered, reality-bending, time-hopping story all laid out. I hope that it's helped you to realize what a huge chance Kuro has made creating a complex story like this. And I hope that you find, as I did, that the effort was well worth it. There are several epilogue conversations you can have with Lupa and Cardathia after the main story wraps up. Be sure and do those right away while the story is still fresh. Oh, and don't forget the one with Buling as well. I'm pretty sure she'll be back, boss. And that's going to be a wrap for this episode of I'm Still Playing. Let me know what you thought about the 2.4 story in the comments below. And as always, whatever you're playing, play hard. Cheers.